The glint of the setting sun off the polished mahogany table was the last thing I noticed before my world tilted. Brandon Hayes, smirk plastered across his face, didn't just dismiss my presentation. He took the meticulously prepared schematics, the culmination of 2 years of my team's blood, sweat, and vision for the city's largest urban renewal project, and with a casual, almost playful flick of his wrist, sent them scattering across the floor. Eleanor Hayes, his mother and CEO of Apex Developments, merely offered a tight, disdainful smile, her eyes never leaving mine. "Mr. Thorne," she purred, "some ideas, much like some people, simply don't belong in these hallowed halls." It was 3:47 p.m. They had no idea they had just declared war on a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm 42 years old, and I've built Nexus Design Group from a single drawing board in my cramped apartment to a respected, award-winning firm. My parents immigrated to this city when I was a child, bringing with them a burning desire for a better life and an unwavering belief in hard work. They taught me that integrity isn't a luxury, it's the foundation of everything worthwhile. For 3 decades, I've navigated the cutthroat world of urban planning and architecture, proving that innovative design and community impact aren't mutually exclusive with profitability. My goal has always been to build spaces that last, spaces that serve, spaces that inspire. I poured my life into Nexus, creating a legacy for my daughter, Elara, ensuring she'd never know the struggles her grandparents faced. My daily routine was a rhythm of early mornings, late nights, and a constant flow of creative energy. I loved walking through the city, seeing the bones of its past, and envisioning the skin of its future. My team at Nexus shared that passion. We weren't just drafting buildings. We were sketching dreams. Our latest and by far most ambitious dream was a Viridian Gateway project, a multi-billion-dollar urban renewal initiative aimed at transforming a neglected downtown district into a vibrant, green mixed-use hub. It was a project that could redefine our city and cement Nexus Design Group's place as a leader in sustainable urban development. The first red flag wasn't a sudden explosion, but a quiet, almost imperceptible tremor beneath the surface. It was a few months prior at a pre-bid industry mixer. Brandon Hayes, the freshly minted head of acquisitions for Apex Developments, had approached me. He was in his late 20s, dressed in a custom suit that screamed expense account, but his eyes held an unnerving emptiness, devoid of genuine curiosity or respect. "Thorne, right?" he'd said, not bothering to wait for my confirmation. "Heard you guys do some quaint stuff. Eco-friendly parks, community gardens, that sort of thing." He'd chuckled, a sound like gravel crunching underfoot. "Cute. But Viridian Gateway isn't a playground. It's a financial behemoth. Apex deals in power, not potting soil. You're out of your league, mate." I'd offered a polite, if strained, smile. "Mr. Hayes, our quaint approach has won us 3 national design awards and significantly increased property values in every neighborhood we've touched." He'd merely waved a dismissive hand. "Awards are for mantelpieces, Thorne. Cash flow is for shareholders." Just a friendly heads up. The encounter left a sour taste, but I dismissed it as youthful arrogance, a common byproduct of too much money and too little experience. I told myself to focus on the merit of our proposal, not the insolence of a privileged heir. But a tiny seed of unease had been planted. The true escalation began subtly, a slow tightening of the screws. Apex, under Brandon's direction, started a whisper campaign, subtly questioning Nexus's financial stability and our ability to handle a project of Viridian scale. Our mid-sized firm, while respected, couldn't match Apex's sprawling public relations machinery. Then came the misplaced documents, the accidental scheduling conflicts that always seemed to favor Apex, and the increasingly pointed questions from city council members who, just weeks ago, had been singing our praises. It was a campaign of 1,000 paper cuts, designed to slowly bleed us dry of credibility and confidence. One particularly frustrating afternoon, Chloe, my brilliant and fiercely loyal executive assistant, stormed into my office. Her usually calm demeanor was replaced by a simmering anger. "Marcus, you won't believe this," she began, brandishing her tablet. "That anonymous smear piece about Nexus in the City Quarterly? It turns out the independent journalist, who wrote, "It is Brandon Hayes' cousin," and the source quoted extensively, a former city planning official. "Is his uncle on his mother's side. It's a family hit job." My jaw tightened. "They're not just trying to win, Chloe. They're trying to annihilate us." This wasn't professional competition. It was personal warfare. The stakes suddenly felt much higher than just a contract. It was about our reputation, our livelihood, our very right to exist in a space dominated by giants. The next significant escalation was at the Preliminary Review Committee meeting, a closed-door session where each design group presented a high-level overview. Brandon predictably dominated the room. He spoke with an air of practiced authority, presenting Apex's vision with slick animations and jargon-filled projections. His design was all glass and steel, a monumental structure that loomed over a proposed district, utterly devoid of green spaces or community integration. It was everything Viridian Gateway was designed not to be. When it was our turn, I focused on the human element, the flow of public spaces, the integration of nature, the long-term sustainability. I spoke passionately about how design could foster connection and uplift the community. But as I spoke, I could feel Brandon's eyes boring into me, a silent sneer on his face. When I finished, he cleared his throat loud enough to draw attention. "Impressive rhetoric, Thorne," he drawled. "Very poetic. Almost makes you forget the budget shortfalls and a rather ambitious timeline you're proposing for your living walls." He punctuated his comment with a dismissive wave. The committee members, usually engaged, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. His words, though vague, planted seeds of doubt, making my passionate vision seem naive and impractical. The insults continued to mount. At a major industry charity event, Eleanor Hayes approached me directly. Her smile was like a perfectly crafted porcelain doll, beautiful but utterly cold. "Marcus," she began, her voice dripping with false warmth, "I admire your tenacity. Really, I do. But you must understand, darling, this city is a chess game, and Apex plays with queens and kings. You're still learning the moves with your little pawns." She gestured vaguely at my team, who stood a respectful distance away, their faces a mixture of confusion and hurt. "Perhaps you should stick to smaller projects where your unique approach can truly shine. Maybe a new community center, a renovated playground." Her words were a deliberate jab, referencing the type of quaint project Brandon had mocked, effectively sidelining my firm before the main game had even begun. I remember the look on Chloe's face, the slight tremor in her hands as she compiled the documentation for Viridian Gateway. My team had poured their hearts into this. The implications of Eleanor's public dismissal were clear. Apex intended to crush us, not just beat us. The next morning, I initiated a deep dive into Apex's recent projects, not just their glossy marketing materials, but the actual planning documents, the permits, the environmental impact reports. I wanted to understand how they achieved such rapid, aggressive growth. Chloe, with her uncanny ability to dig through public records, was instrumental. "Marcus," she'd report a week later, "there are a few anomalies, nothing outright illegal yet, but some very creative interpretations of zoning laws. And their environmental assessments, they seem almost too perfect, like they found the exact sweet spot for minimal impact every single time." This felt like more than just creative accounting. This felt like a carefully constructed facade. The pressure continued. One of our key subcontractors, a family-owned construction firm we'd worked with for years, suddenly pulled out of our bid, citing unforeseen scheduling conflicts. I knew it was Apex. They were systematically isolating us, severing our supply lines, making it impossible to compete. It was a classic corporate tactic, but it stung. This was how empires maintained their dominance, by suffocating any potential rivals before they could even breathe. Then came the meeting that became the fulcrum of everything. The final review session for the Viridian Gateway project, held in Apex Development's opulent corporate boardroom. The air was thick with the scent of money and old power. Eleanor sat at the head of the long mahogany table, Brandon beside her, a smug smile already playing on his lips. My team and I presented our final, refined proposal. I spoke with every fiber of my being, articulating the vision, the community benefits, the sustainable future. I could see some of the city council members, those not entirely swayed by Apex, nodding along, their expressions thoughtful. Hope, a fragile thing, flickered. But as I reached for my carefully organized schematics, Brandon Hayes, without a word, reached across the table. His hand landed on my stack of papers. Pausing for a fraction of a second, his fingers splayed. Then, with a casual, almost playful flick of his wrist, he sent them scattering across the highly polished floor. My meticulously prepared architectural drawings, the detailed blueprints, the financial projections, they flew like discarded leaves. A collective gasp rippled through the room. My heart pounded with a mixture of disbelief and white-hot fury. But I didn't react. I stood motionless, my gaze fixed on Brandon, who merely smirked. Eleanor Hayes, his mother, offered a tight, disdainful smile, her eyes never leaving mine. "Mr. Thorne," she purred, her voice dripping with condescension. "Some ideas, much like some people, simply don't belong in these hallowed halls. Apex has already demonstrated superior capability and a more streamlined approach." Her words, delivered with chilling calm, confirmed her complicity. They weren't just playing hardball. They were openly humiliating me. It was at that exact moment, watching my life's work scatter like trash, that my hope died and something cold and calculating was born in its place. The game was no longer about winning a project. It was about exposing the rot at the core of Apex developments. I bent down slowly, picking up my strewn papers, one by one. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the rustle of paper and the soft clink of Brandon's watch against the table as he casually adjusted his cuff. My hands moved deliberately, each movement a conscious act of restraint. I could feel Chloe's anxious gaze on me, the tension radiating from my team. Eleanor watched me with an almost bored expression, as if I were performing a tedious, predictable act. When I had gathered every last sheet, I stacked them neatly back on the table. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, devoid of anger, but imbued with a steel that I hadn't known I possessed. "Eleanor, Brandon," I said, looking from mother to son, "you have just made a profound mistake. This isn't just about a project anymore. This is about integrity. And you both have none." Brandon snorted, a laugh bubbling up from deep in his chest. "Oh, is the little architect going to cry? What are you going to do, Thorne? Design us out of business with your organic vegetables?" Eleanor simply raised an eyebrow, a picture of dismissive amusement. They saw me as weak, as defeated, and that, I realized, was their greatest vulnerability. I walked out of the boardroom, my team following silently, leaving Apex to their hollow victory. The next few weeks were a blur of intense, covert activity. My team, especially Chloe, became my shadows, my eyes and ears. We decided to pivot. Instead of fighting for the Viridian Gateway project directly, we would expose Apex's modus operandi, their true, streamlined approach. We started by cross-referencing Apex's current project sites with historical zoning maps, public land records, and environmental impact statements from previous decades. It was tedious work, like sifting through mountains of sand for a few grains of gold. The first major breakthrough came from an old city council resolution Chloe unearthed. It detailed a seemingly innocuous zoning chain for a parcel of land Apex had acquired years ago, a parcel now slated to be part of the Viridian Gateway. The change reclassified a protected wetland area as developable commercial land. The resolution passed quietly, with minimal public outcry, attributed to a clerical error. But Chloe found something more. A series of private emails leaked during a forgotten data breach years earlier hinted at substantial donations made to key council members' re-election campaigns just before the vote. The amounts were staggering, far beyond typical political contributions. Then came the true midpoint twist. This particular wetland wasn't just any parcel. It was the same land, a small, vibrant natural area that my immigrant parents, along with other families from our community, had fought to preserve decades ago. It was where they'd planted a small grove of fruit trees, a symbol of their new roots in this country. My heart seized in my chest as I looked at the old photographs Chloe had found, faded images of my parents, younger, full of hope, tending to saplings on that very land. Apex wasn't just building over a wetland. They were building over a piece of my personal history, over the very legacy my parents had tried to secure for our community. The fight was no longer just for professional integrity. It was deeply, profoundly personal. It became a sacred mission. Our investigation intensified. We followed the money, tracing the donations and the subsequent land acquisitions. Brandon Hayes, it turned out, was the key. He had overseen these acquisitions, aggressively pushing through the zoning changes, and then acquiring the land at below market value, often using shell corporations that obscurely linked back to Apex, or even to a trust fund in his own name. He wasn't just an entitled heir. He was a master manipulator, leveraging his family's influence to exploit legal loopholes and ethical boundaries. Chloe discovered a pattern. Apex would identify undeveloped, undervalued land, often with some environmental or zoning constraint. Brandon would then use his connections to resolve these constraints, sometimes through questionable legal interpretations, sometimes through outright bribery disguised as campaign contributions. Then, Apex would acquire the land cheaply, flip it to a subsidiary, and build, dramatically increasing its value. This wasn't just bad business. It was a systematic dismantling of regulations for personal gain. My lowest emotional point came when an anonymous tip led me to the site of my parents' old grove. Apex had already begun preliminary clearing. The small, resilient fruit trees my parents had planted, once symbols of hope, were now scarred, some already toppled, their roots exposed to the unforgiving sun. It was a visceral punch to the gut. I stood there, watching bulldozers chew through what little remained, and felt a wave of profound helplessness wash over me. All my years of hard work, all my belief in ethical development, seemed to crumble into dust. This powerful, unfeeling machine, Apex Developments, was unstoppable. They had the money, the connections, the ruthlessness. I was just one man with a small firm. What could I really do against such an entrenched, corrupt empire? The despair was a heavy cloak, threatening to smother the fire of my resolve. I called Alara that night, my voice thick with emotion I tried to hide. "It's hard, honey," I said. "Sometimes doing the right thing feels like you're fighting the entire world." Her simple, clear voice on the other end, "But Dad, you always say that's when it matters most," was a faint flicker that kept the embers glowing. That conversation with Alara, her innocent yet profound reminder, was the spark I needed. I realized that my revenge couldn't be driven by anger, but by principle. It had to be smart, surgical, and irrefutable. I enlisted the help of David Chun, the junior partner from Zenith Capital whom I'd met at the industry mixer. He was initially wary, concerned about crossing Apex, but I showed him the evidence we'd painstakingly gathered. The suspicious zoning changes, the disproportionate campaign donations, the environmental impact reports that seemed to vanish and reappear with convenient amendments. David was a numbers man, and the financial irregularities spoke volumes to him. He cautiously agreed to help, providing an insider's understanding of how Apex operated financially and, crucially, identifying which regulatory bodies had the teeth to act. We built our case brick by painstaking brick. Chloe meticulously archived every email, every public record, every property deed. David provided projections of the financial fallout for Apex if these irregularities came to light, painting a clear picture of the liabilities. I focused on the visual evidence. Drone footage of the desecrated wetland, juxtaposed with the original environmental impact surveys and community records. It was a story told through data, images, and undeniable facts. We weren't just proving fraud. We were proving a systemic pattern of disregard for the law, for the environment, and for the very communities Apex claimed to develop. Our strategy was multi-pronged. First, we submitted a comprehensive dossier to the State Environmental Protection Agency, detailing the illegal rezoning of the wetland and the subsequent ecological damage. This would trigger an immediate stop work order on the Viridian Gateway project. Second, we provided an even thicker file outlining the alleged bribery and questionable land acquisitions to the District Attorney's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically highlighting the pattern of campaign finance irregularities linked to Brandon. Third, and perhaps most strategically, I reached out to a tenacious investigative journalist, Sarah Jenkins, known for her deep dives into corporate corruption. I provided her with enough tantalizing, verifiable information to pique her interest, promising more once she confirmed the initial facts. She understood the power of public opinion. The first domino fell with breathtaking speed. Within 48 hours of our EPA submission, an emergency injunction was issued, halting all work on the Viridian Gateway project. News channels, initially dismissive of our small firm's complaints, now showed footage of idle construction sites and EPA officials taping off the wetland. Eleanor Hayes was furious, publicly calling it frivolous bureaucracy and a misunderstanding. But the narrative was already shifting. Then Sarah Jenkins' expose hit. Her article, titled Apex of Arrogance: How One Developer Built an Empire on Environmental Exploitation and Political Favors, exploded across local and national media. It detailed the wetland scandal, the suspicious zoning changes, and, crucially, the anonymous campaign donations. She included before and after photos of the wetland, one showing a thriving ecosystem, the other a scarred wasteland. She subtly wove in quotes from concerned community members, including a vague but powerful statement from a local architect who wished to remain anonymous for fear of reprisal, painting me as a whistleblower, a voice for integrity. The public outcry was immediate and deafening. Apex's stock, which had been steadily climbing, plummeted by 25% in a single day. Their carefully cultivated image of corporate responsibility lay in tatters. The district attorney and FBI, armed with our meticulous evidence, launched a full-scale investigation into Apex's past land deals and campaign finance records. Subpoenas were issued. Brandon Hayes, once untouchable, was seen being escorted by federal agents from Apex Tower, his face pale and grim. Eleanor, in a desperate attempt to contain the damage, held a press conference. She tried to deflect, to blame rogue employees, to minimize the environmental impact. But her words rang hollow against the backdrop of Sarah Jenkins' well-researched article and the EPA's official stop work order. She looked visibly older, the stress etching deep lines onto her perfectly composed face. Her empire was unraveling. The smart revenge was in the sheer scale of the exposure. It wasn't just a fine. It was a complete demolition of their reputation and their operational capacity. Apex faced billions in environmental fines, legal costs, and the forced divestment of illegally acquired properties. Their lenders, spooked by the federal investigation and plummeting stock, began calling in loans. Eleanor Hayes, once the queen of real estate, was fighting to keep her company from total collapse. The final twist came during Eleanor Hayes' public apology, a desperate attempt to salvage her crumbling legacy. She spoke of regret, of lessons learned, of a renewed commitment to ethical practices. But as she delivered her carefully scripted lines, a small, almost imperceptible detail caught my eye on the news report. In the background, hanging on the wall of her opulent office, was a framed sepia-tone photograph. It was an old image of the city's early developers, including her own grandfather, standing proudly on a parcel of undeveloped land. I zoomed in on the picture, the distinctive curve of the small river, the cluster of ancient oak trees. It was undeniably the very same wetland my parents had fought to protect, the very land Brandon had destroyed. Eleanor hadn't just allowed her son's corruption. She came from a lineage that saw nature and community as mere obstacles to profit, a legacy of exploitation disguised as progress. Her apology was performance, a desperate attempt to save face. But the photograph revealed the truth. This was a new flaw in Apex, but its very foundation. In the aftermath, Apex Developments was forced to declare bankruptcy. Eleanor Hayes and Brandon Hayes faced a litany of charges, ranging from environmental violations to campaign finance fraud and illegal land acquisition. They lost everything: their wealth, their power, their freedom. Brandon received a substantial prison sentence, a fate Eleanor narrowly avoided through a plea deal that stripped her of every asset she owned and a lifetime ban from corporate leadership. The name Apex became synonymous with greed and corruption. Nexus Design Group, on the other hand, thrived. The Viridian Gateway project was reopened for bids, and our original community focus, sustainable design, was finally selected, not because of a grand power play, but because it was the right plan backed by integrity. The first thing we did was restore the wetland, replanting native species, and even discovering a few surviving saplings from my parents' original grove. We incorporated a beautiful community center into the design, naming it the Thorne Community Hub, a tribute to my daughter and a testament to the power of unwavering values. I learned that true power isn't about crushing your opponents, but about building something so fundamentally sound, so ethically rooted, that it can withstand any storm. The Hayes family thought they were untouchable, that their money and arrogance made them kings. But they forgot that even the tallest towers eventually crumble if their foundations are built on sand. If you've ever been through something similar, fighting for what's right against overwhelming odds, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy true stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more.